to the first of 3 videos going over all that is computers. For starters, my name is Nathan Rampersad and I am the author of Intro to Computers, a book that I have written myself. This video is lab number 1 of that book, and we will be going over how to do the lab in more depth, making the right steps and being safe along the way. I hope that this video will provide that for you. With that said, this may be my first time that I am interacting with you at all. My first confrontation with the viewers and the readers of my book. So, hello. And let's just jump straight into it. Let's just get started and get this show on the road. So the first step that we're going to take to making sure that, or taking apart this computer, is flipping the computer on its side. So we'll panel to that screen now. So, as you can see now, we have the computer flipped on its side. So our first goal is making sure that all the wires on the back are disconnected. It is crucial that all the wires on the back are disconnected, meaning this consists of the power supply, any USB connections, any Ethernet, any VGA ports, or any audio cables that are connected in the back. This is to certify that you are taking the right precautions and making sure that you are completely safe when working on your computer. And it's not something you want to do, right? You don't want to get shocked. So just take the precautions and make sure that you do not get shocked. And you should have already noticed the back of the computer, and this should have already been first knowledge for you because you've already seen these in the last chapter of the different ports that exist on the back of the computer. It pretty much looks the same. So we will go over specifically about these different components towards the end of our journey, so stay tuned for that. Now, as said in this lab, our goal is to remove and make sure that all the components are safely removed from the computer. So, since we are not doing this all the time or as frequently as some other technicians or professionals are, or if you cannot simply afford an anti-static wrist strap or mat, which we will discuss in the next chapter 2 of Intro to Computers, you just need to follow the right steps. And making sure that the computer is away from any electrical objects, that it's not prone to any different damages or any electrical charges of any type of kind. Making sure that it's safely tucked away in its own corner, that you can work on it in the right scene. So, first off, we're going to make sure that we have the proper tools, so that being a Phillips head screwdriver. And a Phillips head screwdriver will be used mostly throughout this video, so that looks something like this. It's a Phillips head screwdriver. As you can see, it's Phillips head. So we're going to be using, make sure that the camera focus, we're going to be using this majority of this journey, so making sure that you have that. One thing you also want to have is a smaller form of a Phillips head screwdriver, that being one that's more usable and more tangible. But based on what I've seen so far about taking apart computers, you most likely won't need it. So just keep that in mind, that you might need it, but most of the time you won't. So, and just keep that in mind, right? Finally, if you're gonna work on a computer, make sure that you have some gloves at hand that are not likely to get electrocuted. These are very cheap, inexpensive gloves that you can find at your local hardware store. So check those out. Make sure you get those. Make sure that you're safe. This could help you protect yourself against any shocks that you may face. So with that said, we're going to jump straight into this. We're going to put on our gloves and make sure that we're completely safe in taking this computer apart. So one thing that we're going to want to do is get our environment ready for taking this apart. So, making sure that we're safe and we're ready to get on the road. The first goal is making sure that your computer is able to take apart. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get started by locating the 2 screws that are keeping this side panel in place. That is, this screw right here and this screw right here. These are 2 important screws. Sorry for the camera shake there. These are two important screws that you should keep in mind because these are the only two screws that hold this side panel that are protecting the computer from opening out. So we're going to start by removing this screw right here. Let's move it from this side. Put that Phillips head screwdriver in and start turning. Gloves are a little bit harder to use, but that's fine. You can finish the job off with a little hand twisting. And when it comes down to taking these screws out, what you want to make sure is that they're in a safely put place so that you won't lose them. For now, I'm going to be resting on the table next to me. So really focus on that. Next is the other screw, in which we will do it again, like so. Make sure that you apply a little bit of pressure so that you don't have any cases where you ruin the head of the screwdriver or the screw. So just make sure you press it tightly. See how we're unscrewing it? And so this is how we're going to do it. Next step, if your computer is anything like mine, you have a little indent right here. And that indent is to help remove the side panel because, as I'll show you later on just in a moment, that this is how the side panel stays in place and it doesn't move around as much. So focus on this little thing. If your computer doesn't have it, it is completely fine. It doesn't need to. There are different ways in which you can keep this side panel in place. So let's do this. Let's pull it. Your goal when having one of these is to pull it forward and to lift it up. Boom, like so. Let's do that again just to make sure that you get an idea of how to remove this side panel. You're going to want to pull this forward, or in some cases simply lift it up, but we're going to have to pull forward in this case. Pull forward and lift that up. Lift it up. After you remove it safely, set it down in a place that won't be hard. As you heard, I just rested it down. So this is it, and this is simply all that we've gotten done so far. I'm just going to make sure that everything is safe and making sure that I'm going over, okay, is everything in proper condition? Am I following the proper precautions? Making sure once you got that in hand, let's move on to the next step, which is an overhead view so we can get a closer look at the PCs. Alright, so let's get straight into this. We're gonna, right now what you're looking at is the overhead view of our computer. As you can see, look at my hands with my gloves, my protective gloves. So, of course, to state it again, when working on this computer, I would suggest that you get an anti-static mat or an anti-static wrist strap if you're going to do this frequently. But for the sake of instruction, I'm going to speed through this real quick. So, now we're able to see all the computer components. So we have our little fan here. We'll go over that later in the videos. We have some more fans over here. We have a couple, whatever this is, we'll look into that later on. We have what's called the power supply here. We have an optical driver, whatever drive that is. We got some RAM sticks, it looks to be. We got a lot of wires going on, and it can seem confusing. So we're going to take it apart. Our first step is to remove any wires that may look to get in our way. So make sure you have your gloves on for this. So look at any wires. Maybe this wires, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to see those clearly. If it may be like that, right? Gonna push it in a little bit. Making sure that you see every single wire. So after looking at all these wires, get an idea. If you're opening up your computer at the moment, I would suggest taking a picture of where all the wires are at. That means looking at any, let's focus there. Looking at where the wires might be so that if you do take it out, that you know where it is. So, looking at these wires, let's start unplugging. But unplug very gentle because this is very delicate technology and you do not want to ruin it. So, we'll start with this wire that's connecting the power supply to the motherboard. That means it's giving power. So, let's remove that safely. There's a little clip on the end that you're going to want to use. So, make sure you feel for any clips. Let's start by removing that. We see this little red, blue, and yellow wire that's connecting this fan to the motherboard. Let's start removing that. we see these two. Let's move this power wire. Let's make sure that's out of the way. Oh, let's keep on coming back. Okay, let's move this out of the way. Okay, so you see this black, these two black wires. This is green, and then this is black. You should be able to see it on camera. Let's start by removing that from the pipe. Be very gentle, very gentle. If it doesn't seem to be coming out, this is a little tough, huh? So let's start by removing that. So, and then next step is to remove this giant colored wire, thick colored wire. After you remove these red and black, have to be very gentle because there's little prongs and there's little needles. That's why you should be wearing your gloves, but there's little needles that you should be aware of. Let's start by removing this big colored wire. It's a little tough. It has a little clip on the end, so just be careful. Very careful. Little clip on the end, if we can bring that closer. Little clip right here. So let's make sure that's out of the way. As you can see, I have my screwdriver. I'm going to put that down for now. We have some wires over here that are connected to the motherboard. We have this orange wire, and we have this other colored yellow, red, white, and blue, and black wire. So we're gonna take those out as well. Just make sure to take out any wires. Make sure to take a picture of any wires that you have. With all these wires. Let's finally remove this long black wire towards the far bottom left of our computer. Remove that wire. So after we removed all our wires, make sure that you put them in a place that's more usable. Let's put them to the side over here. We get a bigger imprint on our computer. So we're gonna panel into another video where we'll get a better view on this. We're focusing on specifically removing the power supply. So we're gonna jump straight into that video after we removed all the wires. So let's get straight into that. So we're gonna jump straight into the removal of the power supply. So after you've unplugged all the wires inside the PC safely and gently, you can begin to remove the 4 screws that hold the power supplies together or in place. So first step is locating those 4 screws. These 4 screws hold the frame of the power supply together with the fan. These hold the fan together. These 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those hold the fan in place. The 4 screws that we're looking for to remove the power supply is right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's start by removing this top left screw. So we're going to remove that. Again, be very gentle and safe. Again, find the place for your screws to be. I have this little container right here where I can safely put the screws. So let's remove the other one. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to show you guys. Right there, as you can see. Sorry if the camera angle is a little weird, but yeah, drops straight out. Removing it. I'm going to put that in our little container here. Leave that right there so you can see it. And finally, for the bottom right. After you've done that, with all your 4 screws in the little container, and finally you can remove the power supply. So let's, oh, we forgot one. Wow, see, that's an important why you should overcheck all your assessments, making sure that you finish the job. So this one's going to be a little tough, so we're going to have to put some pressure. Hold the computer, make sure that's sturdy. Remove all 4 screws. Oh no. Remove all 4 screws. Let's see if we can untie this with our hands for the time being. Remove all 4 screws. Let's remove this. Boom. Now it should come out. See how it's wiggling out? We can actually remove it. So let's make sure that all these things are unplugged. And making sure that all the wires are unplugged. So making sure that all the wires are unplugged. So we removed the power supply. So we removed the power supply. We're gonna move on to the next step. So after this, you can remove all the wires connecting to it. So for the time being, we are going to take back the screws and install it again, just to make sure that you know what you're doing and just to make sure that you get a brief overview. So we're gonna put back the plug in place. Gonna make sure that the screw holes align. Boom. Get that in there. Put back the screws. Hand tight them a little bit so they stay in place. These gloves are making an issue with, it's very hard to grip things. So for the time being, I'm going to remove these gloves real quick, and I'm going to get, so after you got that in, you rest it there a little bit. Screw that in really fast. Make sure that it's all connected. There's no specific order. You just have to do it. Hand tight it first. My goal in this throughout this video and throughout this lab video is to simply show you how to do it and how to take it apart and how to assemble it and how to such. I won't go. Of course, this is simply an intro to book, so we're not going too advanced. Oh no. Important to get some good screwdrivers that have metal and magnetic tips. I'm sorry if my hand is in the way. Let's get these things in. Let's get this boom in. Oh no, this one's being a little tough, but no worries, we'll get it through with the help of YouTube. Make sure to like and subscribe the video so we get some good recognition for what we've done. Alright, so see, it worked. You liked and subscribed. So with that being said, this is how you remove and connect or assemble back the power supply. I'm going to be doing this, and it's connected again. We'll be going in this video, in the next chapter actually, we'll be going over what this switch right here means. So if you really like a sneak peek, it's cool. It's fun stuff, no joke. Make sure you put back all the wires and make sure that it's connected. So for the next step, we will be actually going over and removing the RAM sticks. Exciting, right? Stuff that you'll actually do in your daily life. So let's jump straight into it. Let's jump straight into the RAM sticks. These boys right here, these twins. So to remove the RAM sticks, as I said in the chapter book, the first thing you want to do is notice these white levers on either side of the RAM sticks. And the first step, and this is the easiest, this does not require any tools whatsoever other than your bare hands, right? Other than your bare hands. And you're going to want to notice these. So the goal, and as I said in this book, it's very simple. It's to pull these white levers on the outside. And you can see that now this is a closed position and this is an open position. So your goal is to get this white lever to open outward. And it's a simple push, does not require any force at all, but a simple push. Do this on either side, and after you've done so, you can remove the RAM sticks carefully. And right, and that's very simple. This is the RAM stick, random access memory, used to make sure that the CPU is as fast and effective as possible. So The goal when installing a RAM stick is to notice this little notch right here. You see this little indent, and that means that, and if you look really closely into your RAM key, you see this little notch. Again, you have to make sure that that notch and this notch align when installing. If you don't, you might ruin your RAM stick and it won't be usable. So be very careful. This is expensive technology and you do not want to ruin it. Make sure that notch aligns and get that notch back in. Make sure everything is. To put back in place the RAM stick, you're going to want to just push. If it doesn't click, push, and you should hear a click. Hear that click? Do the same. Hear that click. If you don't hear a click, that means you are doing it wrong. So, we just took apart a RAM stick and we installed it again. Simple as that. Nothing to it. There's no tricks, there's no gimmicks. It's just simple as that. So, the next thing that we're going to be doing is installing or taking apart the CPU, the brain of the computer. Well, let's just get started because that's very exciting. Moving the CPU requires a little more attention to detail because this is an important crucial role to this whole process. So I stated this in the book, and if you haven't gotten the book yet, which I would suggest, I do go over it a little bit, but not as much as I should have. So this is why we have the video. So look at the CPU and notice what's keeping it in place. You see that we've removed this wire right here that is connecting the CPU or the heatsink to the motherboard. And before we go any further, let's go over what this is, this fan. It's not just a fan, it's simply to keep this CPU in cool. This silver thing on the bottom, this silver fan thing that's really cool and nice to touch, is called the heat sink, and this is to make sure that heat is transferred effectively, that the CPU is kept cool at all times. That's why you have a fan, a heat sink, and making sure that this CPU is cool. So after that said, we're gonna have to remove the heat sink and the fan. So first step is to find the screws that are holding it in place. For most CPUs, it's 4 simple screws. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's begin by removing these screws, and whilst I am doing that, make sure that you're doing this very safe. So whilst I am removing these screws, I'm going to take the time to state the whole reason of this video and to go over why this video is so important. If you haven't read the book, first off, you heard that click. There was a click just now when removing it. I'm going to be quiet and remove it. Right, let's remove this one back here. That one seems to be very easy to remove. Let's remove this one back here. I'm sorry if you can't see it, if my gloves are in the way. Safety comes first, right? Listen for the click. Not yet. I usually test to see if I'm actually having any progress. Yes, so there we go. If you heard the click or any type of noise, that should indicate it should be loosely connected. One last screw. So after I'm removing this last screw, I'm going to take the time to go over any the reasons for this book, as I stated before, and that is simply to give you a general overview of what needs to be done. Making sure that we get the process done effectively and making sure that we get it done as fast as possible without ruining our computer parts, and making sure that we understand. I just want to give you an understanding and a brief overview of what we're doing here. So that should be gone. So now that we remove this, notice how we can pick up the CPU or the heatsink and fan. This is what it looks like. This right here, if you can't see, if I can get in frame, is thermal paste. And thermal paste is another way in which electricians and technicians use to keep that CPU cool. It's for optimal heat transfer. You can also see some CPU or thermal paste right here. So what we're looking at right here is the CPU. This is a CPU and it has a little casing, and based on what I've seen so far, a heatsink, a fan, and a casing should indicate how protected a CPU is and how important and vital it is to this whole operation. So the CPU or this casing, CPU casing, is held by this pin right here. And to reveal this pin or to unveil the CPU, you're gonna have to push the pin and pull outwards. So push right here and pull outwards. After you do that, release the pin. It should follow the tension and where it's leading you. Pull the pin all the way back. After you pull the pin all the way back, you should realize that the casing starts to lift up and you're left with the CPU. Again, this is thermal paste, and it's something that you want to keep in check. So here we go. To remove, you don't really want to get your hands dirty with the thermal paste. So just, if you're going to hold the CPU, you're going to want to hold it on the side. And these gloves are terrible to hold it with, but we'll try, and we got it. Now this is our CPU. This right here is the CPU. Let's get that in frame. Look at all those pins of glory. Amazing, right? This is the thing that is so-called the brain of your computer. So let's put that back in safely and gently. Right? Oop, the camera just shook there. Making sure that it's safe. Oh, it doesn't seem to be in. Let's make sure that it's in. Let me remove this glove just to make sure that it's in. Making sure that it's in is another key component. That should be good. Yes, it is good. Push back this thing as much as possible. Again, repeat the process. Let's get in focus. With that said, we're going to reinstall the heatsink and fan just for purposes. So most of the tasks that I'm doing so far is mainly due to are things that eventually in the future you might mod to your PC. So if you want to change your CPU or change your RAM or change your power supply, you know how to take out the power supply from your computer. So let's get our heatsink right here and our fan. I like calling it just a heatsink just for purposes. You can notice this wire right here, and that's the wire that we removed earlier. So making sure that that wire is in reach of its last place. So making sure, don't put the wire over here because it can't reach over it. It can't reach over here. Don't make the wires over here because it can't reach across the fan. So making sure that the wire aligns where it's gonna be. First step is to loosely tighten all these screws. Sorry if my hand is in the way again. Align these screws, making sure that they're aligned. After they're aligned, you can get screwing away. I'm not going to go over this part for now, but we're going to do it. So stay tuned. The next step that we're going to do is going to be closer to the final step. It is about the hard drive. So stay tuned or keep on watching. So let's look forward to the removal of the hard drive. This is where mainly all we discussed in the last chapter of my book. And if you didn't read the book, the hard drive is where all your permanent data is stored. Unlike the RAM sticks that we saw over here, random access memory is not permanent. It's simply stored there temporarily, making sure that the CPU is run as effective. But the HDD, hard disk drive, is where all your permanent data is stored. So let's remove all these wires connecting it. The hard drive is very simple. Making sure that we don't lose this. Okay, so let's move that out of there. The hard drive is very simple. There's two screws that are locating it. Simply remove those screws. I won't be doing it for time's sake. And also, just to save your time, you most likely won't need to remove it. Or you can add another hard drive right here, just in case that, and you get another adapter. To add a hard drive, this is a 500 gigabyte that you're looking at right here. It's just not a lot, but it's good enough to get the job done. You can add 1 terabyte here and 1 terabyte here for maximum capacity, which is a lot for the average person. So we won't be removing it just because it's not necessary and it's not as hard and it's not as needed as, let's say, the CPU is. But just for pointers, make sure that you are safe and all the wires are detached. You have your gloves on because it does get pretty sharp over here. remove it safely. So we're moving on to the next step, which is locating and how to remove the motherboard. So let's jump straight into that. Okay, so for the next step, we're going to want to remove the motherboard. And to remove the motherboard, you're really going to want to look for the screws that are keeping it in place. So that being said, we're going to look for these screws right here. And any screws, this like the screws that are keeping the motherboard in place are indicated by little white arrows or white triangles. So you can notice some over here. You notice some over here. You notice some over here. And you notice some over here. So to remove the motherboard off of its standoffs. So standoffs are what the motherboard is on, are to keep the motherboard a lift so it doesn't touch the metal plate of the PC. So if you were to remove this motherboard right now, you would see standoffs. They're little metal bits that keep that motherboard above the metal plate. So the main part of this video was to go over pieces that you would that are really interchangeable and that you can mod, such as RAM, power supply, hard drive, or CPU. The motherboard is something that I don't generally see being replaced. With that said, we won't go into depth of removing the motherboard, but you can try it on your own. It's very easy, just as any other computer component in this video. So really look into that. So since we're not going to remove the motherboard, we're going to jump straight into the point of this video. It was after you've done all this, make sure that you put all your wires in place. Look at that picture that you took in the beginning of the video, and making sure that all the wires are in the proper place. If not, then you'll receive some error messages that we will be looking at in later chapters or later parts or sub-chapters of my book. So look into that, make sure that your hard drive is connected, making sure that it's getting power, making sure that your motherboard and CPU fan is connected, making sure that everything is receiving power, getting power, and retrieving power. So it was an honor to make a video for you guys, and we'll outro out with this, with a peace out. So until next time, until lab 2, this is it for now. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment or to email or whatever it may be to contact me. If you have any questions, I will do my best to answer. So